The porcelain mug slipped from my shaking hands and crashed onto the polished hardwood floor, exploding into tiny white fragments. The sharp sound echoed through the quiet kitchen, but I barely noticed it. My heart had already stopped for another reason. Then I heard my son's voice. It wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, it was filled with pain. "Mom." The way he said that single word made me spin around so quickly that I nearly lost my balance. My son Darren stood frozen in the kitchen doorway. At 26 years old, he'd spent the last 2 years trying to be the strong one after his father died. He buried his grief beneath long workdays and reassuring smiles, pretending he was holding everything together. But the young man standing before me now looked completely different. His face was drained of color. His eyes were bloodshot and swollen, as though sleep had abandoned him for days. Even his hands shook uncontrollably. "Darren," I whispered, my heart racing. "What's wrong?" He opened his mouth, but no words came. Instead, he ran both hands through his dark hair. The gesture struck me immediately. Jordan always did that whenever something weighed heavily on his mind. For just a heartbeat, it felt as though I was looking at my husband instead of our son. The memory hit me without warning. 2 years had passed since Jordan's funeral, yet the grief returned with the same unbearable force. Darren slowly crossed the kitchen and dropped into one of the chairs at the table. Leaning forward, he rested his elbows on his knees and stared at the floor. "I tried," he finally murmured. "I honestly tried." I stepped closer. "Tried to do what?" "Forget." He swallowed hard before continuing. "I tried pretending none of it existed." A knot tightened inside my chest. "What are you talking about?" When he finally looked at me, I didn't see the grown man he'd become. I saw the little boy who used to race across our backyard until he collapsed into fits of laughter, his eyes filled with tears. "I found something." Every muscle in my body tensed. "What did you find?" Without answering immediately, Darren reached into his jacket and carefully pulled out an old envelope. The paper had yellowed with age. Its edges were worn and brittle. It looked as though it had been hidden away for years. "I found it in Dad's workshop." My heart skipped. His workshop? After Jordan passed away, I'd searched every corner of that building. Every cabinet, every drawer, every toolbox, every dusty shelf. I'd packed away his woodworking tools, sorted through old photographs, donated supplies he no longer needed, and cried over memories tucked inside handmade boxes. I had been certain there were no secrets left. Yet somehow, this envelope had escaped me. I stared at it in silence. "It was hidden behind one of the cabinets," Darren explained quietly. Slowly, I reached toward it. The moment I noticed the handwriting, my breath caught. I would have recognized it anywhere. The careful slant, the neat lettering, the bold strokes. Jordan's handwriting. Across the front, written in faded blue ink, was only one word. Tara. My name. Nothing else. Jordan hadn't scribbled it carelessly. He'd written it with the same gentle attention he used when signing birthday cards or leaving sweet notes beside my morning coffee. I hadn't seen my name written by him since before we buried him. The sight alone nearly shattered me. "How long have you had this?" I asked softly, unable to look away. Darren lowered his eyes. "A week." I looked at him in disbelief. "A whole week?" I didn't know what to do. His voice cracked. "I found it 7 days ago, but I couldn't make myself bring it to you." "Why?" "I wasn't sure you were ready." Silence settled over the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed quietly. Outside, birds continued singing as though the world hadn't changed. Inside our home, everything suddenly felt different. Finally, I broke the silence. "So why today?" Darren looked directly into my eyes. "Because I'm not ready either." His voice trembled. "But if Dad left this behind, maybe it's the only thing that can explain everything." My trembling fingers accepted the envelope. It felt strangely heavy. Not because of the paper inside, because of what it carried. Hope, fear, love, regret. Questions that had been buried alongside my husband. I stared at it for what felt like forever, before finally whispering, "I can't open it." The words escaped before I could stop them. Darren simply nodded. "I know. I don't think I can. You don't have to do it alone." Another long silence followed before he offered me a small, reassuring smile. "When you're ready, we'll read it together." Those words stayed with me for the rest of the afternoon. Ready. How could anyone possibly be ready to hear one final message from the person they loved most? I wandered aimlessly through our house. Every room still carried pieces of Jordan, the scrape on the hallway wall from the day we moved the piano, the old coffee stain beside the sink he'd always promised to repaint, his favorite chair by the front window. Even now it looked as though he might walk through the front door, sit down with the newspaper, and ask whether I'd brewed enough coffee for both of us. Instead, the silence answered for him. As evening settled over Cedar Ridge, Colorado, the mountains beyond our neighborhood glowed beneath a warm orange sunset. The beauty outside almost felt unfair. How could the world remain so peaceful while mine still felt broken? I was sitting in Jordan's favorite chair when Darren quietly entered the living room. "Have you decided?" I looked down at the envelope resting in my lap. My hands still trembled. "Stay with me." He nodded and sat beside me without another word. Together, we carefully opened the envelope. The seal broke with a soft crack that somehow sounded louder than thunder. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. The handwriting was unmistakably Jordan's. I unfolded it carefully, but tears blurred my vision before I reached the first line. "My dearest Tara, if you're reading this, then I ran out of time. I never found the courage to tell you everything while I still could. Please forgive me." My throat tightened so painfully that I had to stop. Darren gently rested his hand on my shoulder. "You can do this." I took a shaky breath and continued reading. "You've loved me with a kindness I never truly deserved. And I know you'll continue loving Darren with that same strength. But before either of you decides what should happen to this house, there's something you deserve to know." I frowned. "What does he mean?" Darren whispered. "I don't know." I continued. "The truth is, this house was never only ours. Something has always been hidden inside these walls. Something I should have told you years ago. Something I never finished. When the time is right, you'll understand everything. The moment you see her name." That was all. No explanation. No farewell. No final words beyond his name. I turned the page over. It was blank. I searched the envelope again. Nothing. Darren looked just as confused as I felt. "Who's she?" "I honestly don't know." The room suddenly felt colder. Jordan hadn't left us peace. He'd left us a mystery. As I slipped the letter back into its envelope, something caught my attention. Near one corner, almost hidden beneath faded ink, was another word. Barely visible. Just one name. Holly. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it. Slowly, I looked at Darren. "Do you know anyone named Holly?" For several long moments, he said nothing. Recognition slowly crossed his face, then confusion, then fear. Finally, he whispered, I think Dad mentioned that name once." The room fell silent again. Neither of us realized it then. But that single name was about to unravel everything we thought we knew about Jordan and the life we'd built. Neither Darren nor I said much after discovering Holly's name. The evening drifted by in uneasy silence, but my mind refused to rest. That one name echoed over and over in my thoughts. Holly. Who was she? A friend? A former colleague? Someone Jordan had helped? or someone he'd kept hidden from me all these years. Sleep never came. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jordan's final letter. "You'll understand everything the moment you see her name." By dawn, I had given up trying to rest. The house was wrapped in the soft blue light of early morning when I wandered into the kitchen. I poured myself a cup of coffee, but before I could take a sip, my eyes drifted toward the backyard. Jordan's workshop stood exactly where it always had. For months after his death, I'd avoided going inside unless I absolutely had to. Even now, I could almost smell the cedar, fresh sawdust, and varnish drifting from beneath the old wooden door. It still felt like he had only stepped away for a few minutes. A short while later, Darren walked into the kitchen. He followed my gaze toward the workshop and quietly asked, "You're thinking about going back in there, aren't you?" I nodded. "I don't believe that letter was the only thing your father left behind." Without another word, Darren picked up the workshop key. Together, we crossed the yard. The moment we stepped inside, dust floated lazily through narrow beams of sunlight pouring in from the windows. Nothing had changed. Jordan's tools still hung neatly along the wall. His workbench remained cluttered with rulers, chisels, clamps, and tiny jars filled with carefully sorted screws. The room still carried his presence, painfully, comfortingly. Darren walked toward the cabinet where he'd discovered the envelope. "I've been thinking," he said. "If Dad hid one letter here, maybe he hid something else." We searched separately. I checked shelves and storage bins. He emptied drawers and examined every corner of the workshop. Almost an hour passed before I heard him call. "Mom." Something in his voice made me hurry over. He was kneeling beside Jordan's old workbench. "I found something." Hidden behind a loose wooden panel was a small cedar box. It wasn't large, just big enough to hold photographs or keepsakes. The carved initials burned into one corner told me immediately who had made it. Jordan. Years ago, he'd laughed and told me every woodworker should leave behind one secret signature. Apparently, he had meant it. Darren carefully lifted the lid. Inside lay dozens of old Polaroid photographs. Some had faded with time. Others were still surprisingly clear. We sorted through them one by one. Christmas mornings, fishing trips, family birthdays, summer vacations, photographs I'd seen many times before. Then, one picture stopped us both. Jordan stood smiling beside a young woman with long, dark hair blowing gently in the wind. They weren't embracing. They weren't standing close enough to suggest romance. Yet they clearly knew each other well. There was an unmistakable comfort between them. I turned the photograph over. Jordan's handwriting covered the back. Holly. Summer 1997. Neither of us spoke. Instead, we stared at the picture. Then Darren suddenly pointed toward the background. "Mom." "What?" "I think I recognize that place." I leaned closer. Behind Jordan and Holly stood the unfinished frame of a house. Stacks of lumber surrounded the property. Wooden beams reached toward the sky. Construction equipment sat nearby. Something about it felt strangely familiar. Then the realization hit us both. The large front windows, the stone chimney, the shape of the porch. My heart sank. "No." Darren slowly nodded. "I think it's this house." The words echoed around the workshop. I looked again. He was right. Jordan and Holly had been standing beside our home. Years before it had ever been completed. Years before Jordan and I met. We emptied the rest of the cedar box onto the workbench. More discoveries waited inside. Rolled architectural drawings, fabric samples, paint swatches, wood samples labeled in Jordan's handwriting. Every single item had been dated years before our marriage. Finally, I unrolled the largest document. It was the original blueprint for the house. Across the top were the project details. At the bottom appeared Jordan's signature. Beside it, another signature. Holly. My hands began to shake. She helped design this house. Darren looked at me in disbelief. But you've always said you and Dad planned everything together. I believed we did. The words caught painfully in my throat. After nearly 30 years together, I was discovering there were entire chapters of Jordan's life I'd never known existed. That realization hurt more than I expected. Not because I felt jealous, because I realized the man I loved had carried a secret for decades. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Eventually, Darren noticed something else beneath the workbench. A loose floorboard. He carefully pried it open. Hidden underneath was a small steel lockbox. We carried it inside the house and placed it carefully on the dining table. After a few moments of struggling with the old latch, Darren finally opened it. Inside rested a bundle of envelopes tied neatly together with faded twine. Every letter was addressed to the same person. Holly. None of them had ever been mailed. With trembling hands, I unfolded the first. Dear Holly, I wish I could explain why I never finished what we started. The words struck harder than I expected. I picked up another. Dear Holly, whenever I look at this house, I still see your dreams built into every wall. I'm sorry I couldn't finish it the way you imagined. Another letter waited beneath it. Dear Holly, I've met someone who has made me believe life can begin again. No matter where my journey takes me, I'll never forget what you gave me first. Tears blurred my vision. Each letter revealed another piece of a past Jordan had never shared. Then I noticed one final envelope. Unlike the others, it wasn't addressed to Holly. It was addressed to Darren. The date written on the front was only 1 week before Jordan died. Darren looked at me uncertainly. Should I open it? I nodded. He wrote it for you. He slowly broke the seal and unfolded the paper. At first his voice remained steady, but halfway through, it broke. Son, if I'm no longer here when you become the man I always hoped you'd be, remember this. Strength isn't found in silence. I believed that for far too many years. Tell people you love them. Tell them when you're afraid. And if life ever leaves you feeling lost, take care of your mother for me. Darren stopped reading. Tears streamed down his face. He knew you'd still be here. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. He always knew. For a long time we remained together in complete silence. But this silence wasn't painful. It felt peaceful, almost healing. As Darren gathered the letters together, something slipped from beneath them and drifted onto the floor. It wasn't another letter. It was a folded legal document. I picked it up and unfolded it carefully. My eyes scanned the page. Jordan's name. My name. Then, a third signature. Holly. My heart pounded. What is this? Darren gently took the document and read it from beginning to end. It says the property was originally co-owned. He looked up slowly. It was signed before you and Dad got married. The truth settled over us one heartbreaking piece at a time. Jordan hadn't simply promised Holly he would finish building the house. The house had once belonged to both of them. When he later brought me there, he had unknowingly brought me into a dream they had started together. Mom. Darren looked at me carefully. Did you ever know any of this? I slowly shook my head. No. He looked conflicted. Maybe Dad changed everything afterward. He spoke quickly, almost trying to convince himself. Maybe he planned to fix it. I wanted desperately to believe that. But the deed didn't lie. The home where we'd built our family had first been part of someone else's love story. Just then, a gentle breeze drifted through the open workshop door. Several loose papers lifted from the table. One floated to my feet. I bent down and picked it up. At the bottom, in Jordan's unmistakable handwriting, were 4 simple words. Forgive me. She deserved peace. I folded the page carefully. My heart ached. Not because I was angry, but because I was finally beginning to understand. Darren quietly broke the silence. What do we do now? I looked beyond the workshop toward the open field where the white roses swayed gently in the evening breeze. Then I answered. Tomorrow, we find Holly. Morning arrived quietly, carrying the fresh scent of rain through Cedar Ridge, Colorado. Darren and I drove without speaking. The wooden box of letters rested on his lap, while Jordan's final note remained tucked safely inside my handbag. Neither of us knew what to expect. The discoveries we'd made the previous day still weighed heavily on our hearts. According to an address tucked inside one of Jordan's sketchbooks, Holly lived at the end of a quiet gravel road where the hillside overlooked an open meadow. When we pulled up beside a small white cottage, I saw a woman standing near a painted garden gate. She held a basket filled with freshly cut flowers. The moment she looked up and saw us, she didn't seem surprised. Instead, she offered a quiet, understanding smile. I wondered how long it would take, she said gently. I stepped closer. We found Jordan's letters. After a brief pause, I added, and the property deed. For just a moment, sadness crossed her face. So, you know. I know some of it, I replied honestly, but I still don't understand why Jordan never told me. Holly took a slow breath before answering. Because he wanted to protect everyone. Her eyes met mine. You. Then she looked down. And me. For several moments, none of us spoke. The breeze carried the fragrance of white roses across the garden. Finally, Holly broke the silence. I loved Jordan once. Her voice remained calm, without regret. But when he met you, Tara, I knew he'd finally found the peace he'd been searching for. She looked toward the distant hills. Yes. We planned that house together. A gentle smile appeared on her face. But it only became a home after he filled it with the life you built together. Her words settled softly inside my heart. There was no bitterness, only honesty. Then Holly turned toward Darren. Your father always said you were the bridge between two lives that never should have become enemies. Darren blinked. He actually said that? She nodded. He also used to say that love doesn't always belong to one chapter of life. Sometimes it keeps moving until it finally finds where it was always meant to stay. Tears filled my eyes. The anger I'd expected to feel simply wasn't there. Instead, there was gratitude. Jordan hadn't lived a lie. He had simply carried the weight of an unfinished past while doing everything he could to build a beautiful future. Holly reached into the basket she was carrying and removed a sealed envelope. I've been keeping this for a long time. She placed it gently into my hands. He asked me to give it to you if the house ever became too heavy to live in. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was one final letter. My dearest Tara, if you're reading this, then the truth has finally found its way home. I built that house because two extraordinary women changed my life. One taught me how to begin again. The other taught me how to stay. If the walls ever become too full of memories, open every window. The air inside that home has always belonged to you. Near the bottom, written faintly in pencil, was one final sentence. Tell Darren I kept my promise. I gave Holly peace, and I gave you yours. I closed my eyes. Everything around me seemed to stand still. The rain had stopped. A bird began singing somewhere nearby. When I looked up again, Holly was smiling through tears. He was right, she whispered. You gave that house its soul. Without thinking, I stepped forward and embraced her. Not as two women competing for the same man, but as two women whose lives had been forever changed by him in different seasons. For the first time since Jordan died. Saying goodbye no longer hurt. By the time Darren and I returned home, sunlight had broken through the clouds. Warm golden light filled every room. Darren Stokanod quietly in the living room, looking around. It feels different now. It does, I replied. He turned toward me. What are you going to do with the house? I looked at the framed painting on the wall, the white roses outside the window, Jordan's favorite chair beside the fireplace. Then I smiled. I'm keeping it, but not as a place that's trapped in the past. As a place where new memories can begin. Darren smiled. I think Dad would have loved that. The rest of the afternoon passed as we organized Jordan's workshop one final time. Most of the remaining letters were unfinished. Fragments of thoughts, half-written apologies, simple reminders that love is rarely perfect. Just before sunset, I noticed one last envelope tucked beneath the wooden box. It wasn't addressed to me. It wasn't addressed to Darren. Across the front were simple words. To whoever calls this house home. Next. Curious, I opened it. The paper still carried the faint scent of cedar. Inside, Jordan had written, If you've found this letter, please take care of the garden. The white roses have roots much deeper than they appear. They grow best when cared for by someone who has experienced both heartbreak and hope. That's why this home exists. Not to preserve pain, but to help it bloom into kindness. A tear rolled down my cheek as I smiled. He wrote this for everyone. Darren stood beside me. He left a piece of himself everywhere. I nodded. That's what love does. Outside, a gentle breeze swept through the garden, carrying white rose petals across the porch. One landed softly on the letter. I looked toward the evening sky and finally felt something inside me grow still. Jordan's love hadn't disappeared. It had simply changed its shape. It lived on through us, through the house, and through every quiet act of kindness that would follow. Darren gently closed the open window. You okay, Mom? I smiled. I am now. The last rays of sunlight stretched across the living room floor, resting on the old painting that still hung on the wall. Holly's painting of the house. The painting that had quietly started it all. For just a moment. It almost looked alive again. Enjoyed this story? If this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another heartfelt story. And now we'd love to hear from you. If you were in Tara's place, would you have forgiven Jordan after discovering the truth about Holly? Or do you believe some secrets should never stay hidden? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every comment, and your perspective might inspire someone else. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.